Let me tell you something about compliments. Back on Earth, a compliment is simple. You see someone wearing a nice jacket, you say, "Hey, nice jacket." You see someone who did something impressive, you say, "Man, that was impressive." It doesn't mean anything beyond the words. It doesn't carry weight. It doesn't carry obligation. It's social lubricant, nothing more, something to fill the space between two people who'd otherwise just stand there staring at each other like strangers. I grew up in a small town in northern Italy, near Bergamo. My grandmother used to say that a compliment was a gift you could give for free. She said that the most important thing a person could do in a single day was make someone feel seen. She meant it genuinely. She was a small woman who smelled like bread and rosemary, and she had this way of talking to strangers in the market like they were old friends she hadn't seen in years. I used to think I understood what she meant. I don't think she accounted for the possibility of alien vampires. And I definitely don't think she accounted for Valith Morsarine, daughter of the Bloodhouse Sarine, ranked battle singer of the Vethkai, 712 years old as of last galactic standard cycle, and the most terrifying person I have ever had the misfortune of accidentally sort of proposing to. Because that is more or less what happened. All I said was that her armor was beautiful. That's it. That was the whole thing. I didn't know. How was I supposed to know? Section 2, the setup. Vareth 9 isn't a glamorous posting. I want to make that clear up front, because people back home, the ones who didn't get pulled into the Earth Defense Auxiliary, the ones who are still living in actual gravity and breathing air that doesn't taste slightly of recycled nitrogen, they sometimes have this romantic idea about what deep space postings look like. They imagine gleaming corridors. They imagine exotic alien cities with lights that bleed color into the dark. They imagine first contact moments and dramatic speeches and humanity standing at the threshold of something magnificent. Vareth 9 is not that. Vareth 9 is a transit station. It's essentially a truck stop at the intersection of 4 trade routes, which sounds impressive until you realize that trade routes, in this context, means enormous, slow-moving cargo haulers carrying processed minerals, frozen protein blocks, and something the Dravathi called cultural objects that we were not allowed to inspect, and that smelled, through their sealed containers, like old leather and disappointment. The station itself is shaped like a flattened disc, with a ring of docking arms extending from the outer edge like the spokes of a wheel. From the inside, it looks like every airport I've ever been in: long corridors, harsh overhead lighting, gates that never seem to be where they're supposed to be, and a constant low-grade hum from the environmental systems that you stop hearing after about a week, and then suddenly hear again at 3 in the morning when you can't sleep. The human section of the station was small. There were 11 of us assigned to the Earth Defense Auxiliary Detachment. 6 auxiliary soldiers, 3 logistics coordinators, 1 medical officer named Priya who had a PhD in xenobiology, and the temperament of someone who had already seen everything and found most of it mildly irritating, and our commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Soha Yildiz, who had the rare quality of being able to project absolute calm in any situation, even situations that absolutely did not warrant calm. My job, specifically, was interspecies liaison support. In practice, that meant I stood at checkpoints, helped translate when the automated systems failed, answered questions from travelers who were confused by human customs forms, and occasionally prevented fights from breaking out in the transit concourse when 2 species with historical grievances ended up in the same queue. It was not exciting work, but it was consistent, and after 8 months on Vareth 9, I had gotten very good at reading the energy of the concourse, knowing when something was about to go sideways, knowing which species needed extra space, knowing which cargo hauler crews were going to cause trouble at the intake windows. I thought I had a handle on things. I was wrong. The thing about Vareth 9 was that it saw a lot of different species come through, but there were certain species you almost never saw. Not because they were barred. The station was technically open to anyone with a registered transit tag, but because some species simply didn't travel through this corridor, or traveled through it so rarely that most of the human staff had never actually seen one in person. The Vethkai were one of those species. I knew of them the way you know of things you've read about but never encountered. They were ancient. They were old even by galactic standards, which is saying something in a galaxy where civilizations routinely counted their histories in tens of thousands of years. The Vethkai had been spacefaring before humanity had figured out iron. They were bipedal, which was one of the things that made them unsettling to look at if you weren't prepared. They were humanoid enough to almost pass, but just different enough that something in your hind brain started sending warning signals before your conscious mind could catch up. And yes, the vampire thing. That's not technically what they called it. The correct Vethkai term, as explained to me afterward by Priya in the tone she reserved for things she found both educational and exasperating, was something closer to sanguine-bonded metabolic process. They didn't need blood in the dramatic horror film sense. It was more that their cellular energy system ran a secondary process that was most efficiently sustained by certain complex protein compounds found in living biological material, including, as it happened, human blood. They didn't attack people. They hadn't done that in centuries, apparently. There were synthesized supplements. There was a whole industry. The blood thing was more cultural at this point, ceremonially significant, tied to concepts of intimacy and bonding and ancestral rites. Not a threat, just a detail. A detail that I had not been thinking about on the morning that everything went sideways. Section 3. The morning it started. It was a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday because Tuesdays on Vareth 9 were when the cargo rotation happened, which meant the concourse got twice as crowded as usual in half. The docking arms were occupied with haulers that needed processing. Tuesdays were loud, and they smelled different. A kind of industrial sharpness from the cargo venting systems mixed with the usual ambient scent of the station, which I can only describe as 40 different kinds of alien and also someone microwaved fish. I had been on shift for 2 hours. I was standing at my checkpoint post near Gate 7 Bravo, which was one of the quieter gates, technically, but was also directly adjacent to the overflow area where travelers who needed additional processing were held. So while it was quiet in terms of foot traffic, it was sometimes eventful in terms of the specific category of travelers who ended up there. I was holding a cup of the station's approximation of coffee, which was not good but was hot and contained caffeine, and I was reviewing that morning's transit manifests on my tablet, and I was not paying close attention to anything in particular because at 2 hours into a Tuesday shift, nothing had yet happened that required close attention. That was when I heard the sound. It was not a loud sound. It was, in fact, a very quiet sound, a kind of low resonance, almost below the threshold of hearing, that I initially thought was a new vibration from the environmental systems. I felt it more than heard it. It was in my chest cavity. It was in the fillings in my back teeth. It was in the small bones of my inner ear. I looked up. She was standing at the entrance to the overflow area. I want to be very precise about what I saw, because this account is supposed to be accurate, and the accuracy matters. I am not describing this for dramatic effect. I am describing it because the Interspecies Relations Division asked me to be specific about first impressions, and because what I saw in that moment was genuinely striking in a way that I did not have any preparation for. She was tall, not as tall as some of the Vethkai in the reference files I'd skimmed during orientation. Those could reach 7 feet without the crest. She was maybe 6'3", 6'4". Her build was lean in the way that suggested not thinness but density, a compactness of structure that reminded me, weirdly, of a finely made instrument. Like she had been designed to do something precise, and had been made exactly right for that purpose. Her skin was, and I need to just say this plainly, the color of deep water. Not blue, not quite. More like the color the ocean is at a certain depth where the light stops being yellow and starts being something else entirely. It was slightly luminescent, not glaringly so, just enough that when the overhead lights caught her at a certain angle, there was a faint internal glow, like a coal that hasn't quite gone out. Her hair was dark and heavy, pulled back in a way that looked structural, not just pinned, but woven somehow into the collar of her armor like it was load-bearing. Her eyes were I read the orientation files. I knew Vethkai had unusual eyes. The files said they were photoreceptively distinct from human eyes and appear to have a luminous quality under certain light conditions. That was accurate the way saying a hurricane is a weather event with notable wind is accurate. Her eyes were gold. Not like jewelry gold, like the kind of gold that exists in the center of a flame. And they moved with a precision and a steadiness that I was not used to seeing in eyes. Not the dart and scan of human eyes, but a calm, deliberate focus that, when it landed on something, seemed to land completely. She was in full armor. That was the thing. Most travelers through Vareth 9 wore civilian clothes, or the equivalent species had different conventions, but the general principle held. You dressed for transit. You weren't in combat gear. The Vethkai woman was in full armor, and it was, I'm going to keep coming back to this word, extraordinary. It was dark, not black, a color that existed somewhere between black and the color of iron filings. It fit her completely, which meant it was custom-made, and it moved with her in a way that metal shouldn't move, or shouldn't be able to move, like each piece was slightly alive and aware of the space it occupied. There were markings on it, not decorative from the look of them. Functional, like the way a circuit board has markings. Dense, precise, flowing in patterns that hurt to look at directly if you tried to follow them, like a visual puzzle that your eye kept slipping off of. And there were what I can only describe as organic elements worked into the armor, not literally organic, not flesh, but curved in ways that referenced biological forms. Ridges that recalled bones, channels that recalled veins. It looked ancient, and it looked newer than anything I had ever seen, and I genuinely could not reconcile those two facts. She was standing at the entrance to the overflow area because she had, I learned later, been flagged by the automated processing system, which had no category for a Vethkai battle singer traveling on a private transit tag with a weapons manifest attached. The system had done what automated systems do when confronted with something outside their parameters, which was flag it and send it to a human checkpoint for manual processing. That human checkpoint was mine. She was looking at me with those gold eyes, and the concourse around her had gotten noticeably quieter than it had been 30 seconds ago. Not silent, just quieter. The way a room gets when something enters it that other things instinctively recognize as significant. I put my tablet down. I put my terrible coffee down. I walked over. Section 4, the interaction. Good morning, I said, in Galactic Standard, which is the interspecies lingua franca and which I spoke at what my evaluation rated as a B+ level, meaning I could conduct functional conversation and read most documents but would occasionally miss a nuance. I'm Specialist Khaledi. Can I help you with your transit processing? She looked at me. Not at me in the way you look at a person. At me in the way you look at something that has just made a sound you didn't expect, and you're deciding whether the sound was significant. The machine found my weapons manifest objectionable, she said. Her Galactic Standard was perfect, not just grammatically, tonally. She spoke it the way someone speaks a language they learned so long ago they've forgotten they learned it. It flags anything in that category for manual review, I said. Standard protocol. It doesn't mean there's a problem. I just need to pull up your transit documentation and verify everything against the manifest. It'll take a few minutes. Minutes, she said. The word landed with a specific kind of flatness that I'd come to recognize in very old beings, The faint incomprehension of someone for whom the granularity of minutes is almost too small a unit to hold meaning. Yes, I said, not long. I pulled up the processing interface on my terminal. Her transit tag came up, Valith Mor Sarine, House Sarine, Vethkai Sovereignty. Her destination was listed as the Outer Rim, a system I didn't know. Her point of origin was the Vethkai home territories, which were so far away that I couldn't immediately imagine what transit route would bring her through Vayreth 9. This station wasn't on any route I associated with Vethkai space. I started going through the weapons manifest. It was long. I want to be clear. The list was long. Not concerning, the cross-referencing against transit codes checked out on everything I could verify. It was just long. There were items on it that I didn't have reference codes for in our system, which was common with Vethkai materials, and those I flagged for the standard secondary review notation. I was working carefully and methodically, because the last thing I wanted was to make an error on the processing of a 700-year-old battle singer's transit documentation. She stood very still while I worked. That was one of the things. She didn't fidget, didn't shift her weight, didn't do any of the things that humans do when they're waiting. She simply stood, still in the way that very large, very confident things are still, present without performing presence. I was almost done. I had been working for maybe 8 minutes. And I glanced up, the way you do when you've been looking at a screen too long. And in that moment the overhead lighting in the overflow area shifted, the way it did sometimes when the environmental system cycled, and the light hit her armor at a different angle than before. And I saw it. The craftsmanship. I mean, I'd known the armor was impressive from the moment I saw her, but this was different. This was seeing the grain of the wood after you've noticed the tree. The light came in at an angle that caught every individual etched marking differently, and I could suddenly see how they connected, how each one flowed into the next, how the whole surface of the armor was a single continuous design that wrapped around her completely, not sectioned, not assembled, somehow continuous, and there was something in the markings that wasn't just pattern. There was narrative in it. There were scenes. Tiny, precise, unmistakable figures in conflict, figures at rest, something that looked like a map, something that looked like a genealogy. It was the most dense and complex piece of physical craft I had ever seen on any world, and it had been worn so long that parts of it had the deep polish of an object that has been touched 10,000 times. And I said, without thinking, without any consideration of context or consequence, or the fact that I was in a professional interaction with a being whose culture I did not fully understand. That armor is genuinely the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I said it the way my grandmother would have said it, the way you say something when the thing hits you and the words come out before the filter does. I looked back at my terminal. I finished the processing. I looked up to hand her the transit confirmation. She was looking at me differently. Not alarmed, not angry, not the range of things I might have expected from someone who had been commented upon by a stranger. She was looking at me with an expression that I couldn't read, which was uncomfortable because I had gotten reasonably good at reading the expressions of several non-human species. This one I couldn't read. It was complex. It was layered. There was something in it that was almost surprise, but not quite, and something that wasn't quite what I'd call warmth but was in the same neighborhood. "You see it," she said. "I'm sorry." "The armor." She said it with a precision that suggested she was being very careful with the words. "You see it, what it carries." "I'm not sure I understood all of it," I said honestly, but I could see that it was significant, that there was history in it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My housesmith spent 40 years on this piece. It carries 12 generations of blood house Sarine, every battle, every binding, every child born and every elder returned to the deep sky." "That's remarkable," I said, because it was. "Yes," she said, and the expression on her face did something that I think on a human face would have been a small, private smile. It is. She took her transit confirmation. She looked at me for one more moment with those gold eyes. Specialist Caletti, she said. My name in her voice sounded different, considered, like she was placing it somewhere. Have a good journey, I said. She left. I went back to my terminal. I picked up my terrible coffee. I did not think about it again for approximately 6 hours. Section 5. What I didn't know. I'll tell you what I didn't know, because not knowing it is the reason this document exists. Among the Vethkai, armor is not clothing. It's not equipment. It's not even quite what we would call a cultural artifact, though that comes closer. The armor of a Vethkai battle singer is the most intimate object they possess, more intimate than any other object in their life, including, and this is the part that is important, objects associated with physical intimacy. This is because Vethkai armor is made to be invisible to most people. Not literally, the armor can be seen. But the markings, the narrative, the history, the genealogical record, the chronicle of battles and bindings and loss and lineage, those are encoded in a visual format that is specifically tuned to AI optical perception. To most other species, the markings look like decoration, like an interesting pattern, like aesthetic embellishment. To Vethkai eyes, they are legible, they are a complete story. To my eyes, human eyes, with our specific and not particularly extraordinary optical range, they should have been completely illegible, decoration at best, noise at worst. But I had seen them, clearly enough to know they were narratives, clearly enough to distinguish figures and scenes and something that looked like a genealogy. I didn't know that was unusual. I also didn't know what, in AI cultural framework, it meant for a non-Vethkai to be able to read armor markings. Priya explained it to me later. She explained it in the specific tone of someone who has recently done very intensive research and is both fascinated by what they found and furious that they have to be the one explaining it. The Vethkai believe, Priya said, sitting across from me in the station medical bay, while I sat with a look on my face that I imagine was something like a man watching a building fall slowly toward him, that the ability to perceive armor markings in a non-Vethkai individual indicates what they call resonance. It's a bond concept. It means that your fundamental life energy signature, and yes, I know that sounds like pseudoscience, but their entire metaphysical framework is internally consistent, and we don't fully understand it yet, so just let me finish, is, quote, harmonically compatible with the armor's carrier, which is the armor's owner. I stared at her. And in their cultural framework, she continued, acknowledging that you have perceived the markings is the functional equivalent of, and again, I want to stress that I am translating a complex cultural concept into approximate human terms, and there is inherent imprecision here, declaring your awareness of the bond. Declaring your awareness of the bond, I repeated. Yes. Which means what exactly? Priya looked at me with an expression that was the exact expression someone makes when they are about to say something that will make the other person's day significantly worse. In the context of Vethkai courtship customs, she said, it is roughly equivalent to initiating a formal declaration of intent. Silence. Declaring intent to what? I said. To pursue, she said, a bonded partnership, which in Vethkai terms is it's permanent. More silence. She thinks I'm proposing to her, I said. The Vethkai framework doesn't have a proposal stage as such, Priya said. The acknowledgement of resonance is itself the beginning of the bonding process. It doesn't require a proposal because the resonance is considered. If I'm reading this correctly, sufficient evidence of fundamental compatibility that further deliberation is regarded as, essentially, unnecessary. She thinks we're bonded, I said. She thinks the process has begun, Priya said, in the careful tone of someone who wants to be technically accurate. Priya. Yes. She's 700 years old. 712, according to her transit documentation. She's a Vethkai battle singer. Ranked yes, third level, which in their system is very high. It means she has participated in and survived a significant number of sanctioned conflicts. She carries a weapons manifest. A very long one, yes. And she thinks that Dario Caletti from Bergamo, who has been on the station for 8 months, and whose most impressive physical achievement this year was fixing the Gate 5 intake terminal by hitting it firmly on the left side. She thinks that I and she are beginning some kind of ancient vampiric bonding process. That, Priya said, is an accurate summary. I put my face in my hands. Section 6, the return. She came back the next morning. I didn't know she was coming. No one told me. I had not slept well, partly because of what Priya had told me, and partly because I had spent 3 hours reading everything the station's cultural database had on Vethkai bonding customs, which had not made me feel better. It had made me feel substantially more specific kinds of worse. I arrived at my checkpoint at Gate 7 Bravo at the start of my shift, and she was already there. She was standing in the concourse, not at a gate, not in the overflow area, just in the concourse, like she had simply decided that this was where she would be. She had changed out of the full armor, which surprised me. She was wearing something that looked civilian by Vethkai standards, which meant it was still dark and structured and covered with a material that looked like it would stop most projectile weapons, but was less formally armored than the day before. She turned her head when I came through the corridor entrance and looked at me with those gold eyes, and I thought, I am in so much trouble. I kept walking, professional face. That was the thing about 8 months of checkpoint duty. It had given me a reasonably functional professional face. I could deploy it. Valith Morsarine, I said. Good morning. Is there something I can help you with? I thought your transit documentation was fully processed. It was, she said. I am not here for transit processing. I said. I wish to speak with you, she said. Of course, I said, professional face. Would you like to use one of the liaison offices? We have meeting rooms available. Here is sufficient, she said. Her eyes had not moved from my face. I want to ask you something. Sure, I said, and I was very proud of how steady my voice was. When you looked at my armor, she said, when you said what you said, did you know what you were saying? I made a decision in that moment. I could have lied. I could have played dumb. I could have said, yes, of course, I study AI culture extensively. I knew exactly what I was doing. That might have complicated things in other ways, but it would have been a way to not admit what I was about to admit. But she was 712 years old. She had those eyes. She would know. No, I said. I didn't. I said what I said because the armor genuinely is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I'm sorry if that was inappropriate. I didn't know the context. I was just being honest. She was quiet for a moment, a long moment. You didn't know, she said. No. But you did see it, the narrative and the markings. I hesitated. Yes, I saw something, scenes, I thought, figures, something that looked like a family record. She was quiet again, longer this time. That should not be possible, she said, not accusatory, more like thinking out loud. Human optical reception does not typically intersect with the encoding spectrum we use for armor narratives. I don't know why I could see it, I said, honest. I'm sorry, I genuinely don't know. She looked at me for a very long time. I did not look away. It seemed important not to look away. Caletti, she said finally, from Bergamo. Yes, I said, slightly startled that she had retained that detail. I find the situation, she said, confusing. Yeah, I said, me too. And something happened to her expression that I was not expecting. It was small. It was controlled. I could tell she was controlling it, but there was something there. Something in the set of her mouth and the angle of her eyes that in a human face I would have called, very specifically, amused. She was amused. She was 712 years old. She was a ranked battle singer of the Vethkai. She had a weapons manifest that went on for pages, and she was standing in a transit station concourse being amused at me. "I am delaying my departure," she said. "Your departure is very delayed," I asked. "By approximately 2 of your station days," she said. "I find I am curious about something." "What's that?" She looked at me steadily. "Whether the resonance is real or anomalous." I opened my mouth, I closed it, I tried again. "How would you determine that?" "Conversation," she said. "Proximity, observation." A pause. "I would not do anything you found objectionable. The customs of younger species are. I am aware that context matters." Something about the way she said younger species. Not condescending, just factual. The way someone who had been alive for 7 centuries might reasonably categorize the difference. Made me feel a very strange mix of very small and very seen at the same time. "Okay," I said. "Okay," she repeated, testing the word. "It means yes, that's fine, 2 station days." She nodded once precisely. "I will be at gate 7 Bravo," she said, "at the same time tomorrow." She left. I stood at my checkpoint and did not move for approximately 45 seconds. Then I called Priya. I am not going to pretend. I handled the next 2 days with composure. I'm going to tell you what actually happened, because this document is supposed to be accurate. And accuracy requires me to tell you that I spent approximately 30 minutes on the first day rehearsing conversations I would not have. That I asked Priya 4 separate questions about Vethkai social customs before she told me, with great firmness, to stop asking her things and just behave like a normal human being. And that Lieutenant Commander Yildiz called me into her office and asked me, in the measured tone she used for situations she had decided not to officially acknowledge, whether everything was proceeding professionally. I told her everything was fine. She looked at me for a moment in the way she had of looking at things that were clearly not entirely fine and deciding, with great efficiency, how much she cared about that particular deviation from fine. "Keep me informed," she said. "Yes, ma'am." Valith came back the next morning. She was at gate 7 Bravo at the start of my shift, same as she'd said. She was wearing what I had come to think of as her civilian configuration, which was still formidably impressive but felt less like walking toward a weapons system and more like approaching a person. An unusual person. A person who was 7 centuries old and not from Earth, and was made of matter that processed energy differently than I did, but still. "Tell me about Bergamo," she said. I had not expected that. "What? You said you are from Bergamo. Tell me about it." I looked at her for a moment, then I said, "It's a small city in northern Italy, on Earth. In the mountains, there's a high city and a low city. The old walls are on the hill. There's a cathedral that was being built for about 200 years. There's a kind of food called polenta. In summer the light comes through the valley in the late afternoon and everything goes gold." She was listening with her full attention, that same quality of complete stillness. "Is it cold?" she asked. "In winter, yes." "I have not been to many cold places," she said. "My home territories have a very controlled climate." "What's it like?" I asked. "Old," she said. "It is a very old place. The architecture is built into the stone of the world. We do not build on the surface as your kind does. We build down, into the deep rock. Everything is underneath." A pause. "There is no natural light. We have learned not to need it." "Do you miss it?" I asked, then caught myself. "Sorry, that might be a personal question." She considered. "The Vethkai do not have a strong concept of nostalgia in the way you seem to use the word," she said. "We have something that translates better as weight, the accumulated weight of a place you carry with you. My home is heavy in that way. I do not think I would call it missing." That's a beautiful way to put it, I said. She looked at me again with that expression I was starting to recognize, the controlled amusement, the thing she kept at the edges of her face and didn't quite let out. You say that word very readily, she said. Beautiful. I use it when things are beautiful, I said. Many beings are more economical with that kind of observation. My grandmother wasn't, I said. I think I got it from her. That landed somewhere. I could tell. I didn't know exactly what it meant in her framework, but something about the mention of a grandmother, of intergenerational inheritance of a way of being in the world, something about that resonated with her. She didn't say so, but the quality of her listening changed slightly. We talked for 2 hours that morning. The concourse was busy around us, but she stood with her back to the wall and her attention on the conversation with a completeness that made the crowd irrelevant. I answered her questions and asked mine, and we found, piece by piece, the shape of what we could actually talk about, which was more than I'd expected. She had been to 100 systems. She had fought in 17 sanctioned conflicts, which in Vethkai law were very specifically defined actions, not wars in the human sense, more like duels at a civilizational scale, arbitrated things. She had seen stars die. She had been present when a species took their first steps off their home planet. She had sat in chambers where the oldest beings in the galaxy argued about things that had not yet been resolved in 10,000 years. And she was curious about me. That was the thing I kept coming back to. Not performing curiosity, she was too old and too direct for performance. Genuinely curious. About Bergamo, about Polenta, about why humans built their cities on the surface instead of into the rock, about the specific experience of living a life that lasted less than a century. Doesn't it feel, she said at one point, very brief? From the inside, I said, it doesn't feel brief. From the inside it feels like everything. You don't experience the shortness of it while you're in it. She thought about that. I have met very few beings, she said slowly, who are at peace with their own finitude. I'm not sure I'm at peace with it, I said, but I'm functioning within it. That's probably the best most of us manage. She looked at me with those gold eyes and said quietly, that is a very honest answer. It's the only kind I'm good at, I said. And the expression on her face did the thing again, the controlled, private, quiet thing, and I thought, I understand it now. I understand what it is. It was wonder. Very carefully held, very tightly managed, but genuine. She was genuinely surprised to be here, having this conversation, with a 28-year-old human from Bergamo who processed transit documentation at Gate 7 Bravo, and got the Vethkai conceptual equivalent of resonance compatibility flags from her 700-year-old battle armor. She had not expected this. In 7 centuries of existence, she had not expected this. I don't think she quite knew what to do with it. Honestly, neither did I. Day 2. The complications started at approximately 1400 hours station time, which was when a Dravathi cargo hauler crew came through Gate 7 Bravo for transit processing. And one of them, their crew leader, a large being with 4 arms and the aggressive energy of someone who had been in transit for too long and had too many opinions about it, saw Valith standing in the concourse and stopped. I should explain, the Dravathi and the Vethkai have history. I didn't know the details and I still don't know the full details, but Priya had mentioned it in one of her briefings, something about territorial disputes in the Outer Rim, several centuries ago, that had never been fully resolved and had left behind the kind of low-grade mutual hostility that old grievances generate. Not active conflict, just a temperature. The Dravathi crew leader looked at Valith and said something in his own language. His tone was clear even if the words weren't. Valith did not move, she did not respond. She was still looking at me. We had been in the middle of a conversation about Earth oceans, which she had found difficult to conceptualize given that her homeworld had no surface water, and she simply continued looking at me as if the Dravathi had not spoken. He said something else, louder. I was already moving toward them. I had my professional face on, and I had my hand up in the de-escalation position that we had been trained for, palm out, body angled, not confrontational, not submissive, just present. "Good afternoon," I said to the Dravathi crew leader in Galactic Standard, because my Dravathi was not good enough for nuanced situations. "Is there a transit processing issue I can help with?" He looked at me with the four-armed equivalent of dismissal. He said something that the translation subroutine in my earpiece rendered, somewhat imprecisely, as, "Not your business, Terran. This is between my crew and the Vethkai blood drinker." "Any situation on this station is my business," I said, keeping my voice level. "This is a neutral transit facility. If you have a grievance, there are formal channels through the station arbitration office. I'd be happy to direct you there." He was bigger than me. He was significantly bigger than me. He had 4 arms and I had 2, and the 2 I had were not particularly impressive by any standard. He looked at me the way large, aggressive things look at smaller things that have nonetheless planted themselves in the way, trying to calculate whether the smaller thing is worth the trouble. Valith spoke. She said 2 words in Vethkai. I didn't know what the words meant. I know what they sounded like. They had that resonant quality, the subaudible hum I had noticed when I first saw her, but deliberately deployed and focused. 2 words that landed in the air between us and the Dravathi crew like stones dropped into still water. The Dravathi crew leader went very still. He looked at her. She was looking at him now, had turned to look at him, and her expression was completely different from the expression she used with me. Whatever had been in it before, the careful amusement, the wonder, the careful calibration, none of that was there now. What was there was the thing that made the hind brain send warnings. What was there was 7 centuries and 17 sanctioned conflicts, and the specific kind of calm that comes from knowing that you are the most dangerous thing in a room. He left. He took his crew and he went through the gate and he left. The concourse around us was very quiet for a moment. Then the ambient noise came back, the way it does, and things were normal. Valith turned back to me. "You moved toward him," she said. "That's my job," I said. "You moved toward him before you knew I would speak." "Yes." "You did not know what I would do, or whether I was in any danger." "I knew you could handle yourself," I said. "But my job is to prevent situations from developing, not to wait and see." She looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her before. Not the controlled amusement, not the wonder, something more direct than either. "The resonance is not anomalous," she said. I blinked. "What?" "I said," she said, clearly and precisely, "the resonance is not anomalous." I didn't know what to say to that. I opened my mouth and nothing came out for a moment. "Valith," I said finally, "I need to be honest with you about something." "You usually are," she said. I am a 28-year-old human being," I said. "I don't fully understand your bonding customs. I know a little of what I looked up and what Priya told me. I know that in your framework what's happened between us has a specific meaning, and I want to be clear, I'm not dismissing that. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying I don't know how to. I don't know where my framework and your framework are compatible and where they aren't." She was listening, that complete still listening. "I live maybe 70 more years," I said. "Maybe a little more. You've been alive for 7 centuries. I don't even know how to hold those 2 facts in the same sentence. And your bonding customs, permanent, you said. That word. I don't know what permanent means when one of the people involved is going to be gone in 70 years. Silence. Does that seem like something that makes sense to you?" I asked. "From your perspective?" She was quiet for a very long time. "The Vethkai have bonded with short-lived beings before," she said finally. "In our long history, it is rare, but it has happened." A pause, and yes, The loss is it is what I would expect, profound. And people still do it, knowing that. Some, she said, the ones for whom the resonance is clear enough to outweigh the knowledge of the ending. I looked at her, she looked at me. I am not suggesting anything immediate, she said carefully. I am aware that your kind processes these things differently, on different timescales. I am willing to account for that. A 700-year-old being willing to slow down for a 28-year-old human, I said. The resonance is real, she said simply, and I am not in a hurry. I have learned patience. 7 centuries will do that, I said. Yes, she said, and there it was again, the small, controlled, private thing at the edges of her face. It does. Section 9. What came next? She departed at the end of the second day. She had given me a contact sigil, a Vethkai communication marker, something between a frequency and a key, which would allow me to reach her house's communication network regardless of where in the galaxy I was. She stood at Gate 7 Bravo, fully armored again, transit bag over one shoulder, eyes like fire gold in the concourse light. You know that people are going to have questions, I said, about whatever this is. I am accustomed to questions, she said. I'm going to need to keep processing transit documentation, I said. I have shifts, I have check-ins, I have a lieutenant commander who already suspects something. That seems manageable, she said. You're incredibly calm about all of this, I said. I am 712 years old, she said. I have had considerable practice with calm. Is it genuine or is it performance? She looked at me. Does it matter? I thought about it. Not really, I said. I was just curious. Both, she said, in varying proportions depending on the situation. That's extremely human of you, I said. Something about that, something about me calling her human, however flippantly, however clearly I hadn't meant it as a literal statement, something about that landed somewhere in her. I could see it. She didn't perform emotion, but she also wasn't able to be entirely opaque, and I had had 2 days of watching her face and learning its small vocabulary. I find, she said, that I am not opposed to that comparison. Then she walked through Gate 7 Bravo, and the gate sealed behind her, and she was gone. I filed my shift report. I sat in the liaison office for a while. Priya came to find me at some point and handed me a cup of the station's terrible coffee and sat across from me and didn't say anything for several minutes, which was its own kind of conversation. So, she said finally. So I said, she's gone. Yes. And I thought about it, about a cathedral that had taken 200 years to build, about armor that carried 12 generations, about a woman who had seen stars die and was curious about polenta, and thought the idea of building cities on the surface of a planet was charming in its specificity. About gold eyes and a resonance I didn't understand, and a contact sigil I had already memorized, the shape of it, the particular texture of the marker against my palm. I don't know what it is yet, I said. I don't know what framework to put it in. I don't know if it fits in any framework I have. But, Priya said. But I think, I said, that I'm going to use the contact sigil. Priya looked at me with the expression of someone who had done very intensive research into Vethkai bonding customs and had complicated feelings about what that research had contained. Dario, she said, you understand that in her framework that would be reciprocation. I know, I said. She's 700 years old. I know. She has a weapons manifest that goes on for pages. I know. You've known her for 2 days. I know, I said, but my grandmother used to say that a compliment was a gift you could give for free. She said the most important thing a person could do in a single day was make someone feel seen. I looked at my coffee. I think Valith Morsarin has not been seen in a very long time. Not the armor, not the history in it, not the person carrying it. I think maybe that's rarer for her than it looks from the outside. Priya was quiet for a moment. That's, she said, either the most human thing you've ever said or the most naive. Possibly both, I said. She didn't argue with that. I want to include this section because the IRD asked for it specifically, a broader context assessment, beyond the personal account. I'm not the best person to write it, but I'll give you what I have. What happened at Gate 7 Bravo was, from one angle, a very small thing. A human checkpoint officer made an offhand observation. A Vethkai traveler interpreted that observation through her cultural framework. Two different species navigated a misunderstanding with honesty and patience. The end. From another angle, it's something different. The Vethkai are ancient. They are one of the oldest spacefaring species in the galaxy. They have watched species rise and fall. They have been present for the births of civilizations. And in 7 centuries of living, Valith Morsarian had traveled through uncountable transit stations, spoken to uncountable beings, moved through the galaxy like water moves through a landscape, present but not leaving marks, not finding marks left in her. Until a human checkpoint officer from Bergamo looked at her armor and just said what he saw. Not to impress her, not because he knew what it meant, because it was true and he was someone who said true things, because a small woman in a market had taught him that the most important thing you could do in a day was make someone feel seen. The galaxy is old. It has been conducting its business for a very long time. And humanity is very young in it, and very loud, and not particularly sophisticated by most measurable standards. And we are constantly making mistakes and causing confusion and navigating situations we didn't realize were situations until we were deep inside them. But maybe, and I'm just offering this as something to consider, not as a conclusion, maybe there's something in that. In the honesty that comes from not knowing enough to be strategic. In the willingness to just say the thing that's true because the thing is true and the moment is real. My grandmother knew that. She didn't know about the galaxy. She knew about Bergamo and the market and the bread and the rosemary. She knew that making someone feel seen cost nothing and mattered entirely. I think if she'd known about alien vampires, she would have applied the same principle. Section 12, the ending. I used the contact sigil 3 days later. I didn't plan a speech. I didn't have a framework. I just opened the channel, and when the connection opened, I said, "I've been thinking about what you said, about the resonance." There was a pause. The length of whatever distance existed between my station and wherever she was. Then, I don't know what it means in my framework, I said. I'm still working on that, but I know that I want to keep talking. About the ocean and the architecture and your homeworld and Bergamo and the cathedral and what it feels like to watch stars die. I want to keep talking. Another pause. "Khaledi," she said. And my name again in her voice landed in that same place, considered, kept. "Yes. I will be passing through Verath 9 again," she said, "in 43 standard days." "I'll be at Gate 7 Bravo," I said. "I know," she said. And in my imagination, and I know this is editorial, I know the IRD asked for factual account, I thought I could hear it in her voice. The thing at the edges. The small, controlled, genuine thing. The wonder. End of testimony. Specialist First Class Dario Khaledi, Earth Defense Auxiliary Unit 7, Verath 9 Integration Station. Filed with Interspecies Relations Division, Human Galactic Integration Authority. Classification. Category 3 Cultural Intersection Event. No disciplinary action recommended. Note from Reviewing Officer LT, CMDR, S. Yildiz, account verified by 3 corroborating witnesses. No protocol violations found. This office recommends the cultural integration orientation materials be updated to include a section on Vethkai armor customs and the perceptual significance of marking acknowledgement. Also recommends the station coffee situation be reviewed. It continues to be per multiple personnel complaints, genuinely terrible. LTCMDR, yield is out.